Hello, everyone, and welcome to the House of the Dragon We Know Scripted TV podcast. This is a special version of the podcast because this is a club, an exclusive club, hosted by some great people, not including myself. This is the book club. This is the book club for House of the Dragon. We are here. We're back by popular demand. And I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, joined today by Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
Good. The book was better. Is that what I'm supposed to say on a book club? I think that's what I'm supposed to say. The book is better. The book is better.
Also with me, it's Mari. How you doing, Mari?
Yes, Maester Mari has come over from the Westerosi kickback to open the books here with you guys and to go over it. I'm so excited to just finally unleash all of the knowledge.
It's so annoying that Aegon put the books away.
Right.
He didn't burn them, but he did
burn them.
He did just put them away in storage. Yeah.
Are we like are we putting Fire and Blood together right now? Is that what we're convening a meeting of the minds?
Basically.
Yes. But who's mushroom?
Should we like make Rhaenyra out to be worse than she actually is? I feel like we should.
Deal.
Yeah, the audience should tell us, do you want the like boring Maester version or do you want the cool, fun, scandalous mushroom version?
Yeah. Well, this is what we're doing here. This is the book club version of the House of the Dragon podcast. We're checking in halfway through the season after episode 4. So we will be talking about Fire and Blood and its relevance to House of the Dragon, which has been adapted from the book Fire and Blood. What we intend to do here is that for the first half or so of this podcast, we will just be talking about the current events in the show and how they relate to the book. And there will be, through that, I'm sure, some amount of implied spoilers in terms of what has changed and how that might influence what comes later. But we will save any actual future events for the end if you would still prefer to avoid hearing too much about what's to come. You can still kind of get a bit more depth on what we have seen so far by listening to the first bit. But we will be talking through all of it from the perspective of the book, the history, the text.
Yeah. I was looking through some information about what George R. R. Martin has said about the book. And one thing I think is interesting, and it's a world I actually don't want to live in. I don't want to live in Westeros. It seems dangerous, especially after last week's episode. If I'm just a commoner on the ground and there's dragons fighting above me, not good. But that there's this idea, I think, that Fire and Blood, the show is the like canon version of what actually happened in Fire and Blood, which George R. R. Martin has said is not true. And I don't actually want to live in that world. I think it's so fun to imagine that Fire and Blood was written and now we get to see what happened and that's what's true and what's not. George R. R. Martin has been like, no, don't think of it don't actually think about it that way because like, obviously we're going to talk about like characters that don't exist that like it's impossible to think that it's like misrepresented in history that they don't exist. Like that's impossible. So clearly it's not full canon, but I choose to live in the world where this is the full recreation of this is the actual events of what happened.
I'm with you actually. Yeah. I agree. I'm like, sorry, bro.
You can't tell me how to interpret your show.
I have chosen to not count Game of Thrones proper as canon, and I have equally chosen to count this as canon for now. So
yes, I think it's just so fun that it's like it feels like, oh, I've read the historical text and now I have this magical window into actual history and I can actually see what happened and compare it to the text that we were taught. It's fun.
I feel like if people, I mean, like we're on a new network than where book club existed before, which is on the previous home of post show recaps doesn't exist. And I think that, so like, we've kind of like maybe belabored the point on PSR, but I feel like now as I'm thinking, like, if you're just watching us for the first time, like it really is the fun of the book. And if you're coming into this and you haven't read the book, like, you're my favorite person ever. You're listening to this podcast without having done any of the, and you're like, I'll be spoiled, whatever, fine, makes my life easier. The fun of it is that Fire and Blood is this historical text. We belabored this point over and over again, I think, on both of our podcasts, that like but it's the best book ever to like be like, I'm going to adapt this book, because for me, and in season 1, it's the Laenor thing where Laenor in the book is like, he dies, he gets killed. There's like all of these ways in which he could die. And a lot of events are like this, where it's like one person says it could have happened this way, one person says it could have happened this way, like one person says it could have been this way. And you get to sort of choose which one you think is probably the most true. The Laenor thing is like, oh yeah, the historians would have never known that he snuck off and faked his own death. So that can still be true and still be like in line with the book. It's like the best way of like being like, you know, the best defense of like, that's not the way it happened in the book, you know? And it's so fun that this is the book that's being adapted, I think. Even if I talked a few weeks ago about how I think like there's a chance that House of the Dragon suffers a little bit from like the lack of dialogue that's written in the books or things like that, and then they have to write it, even though they have George R. R. Martin there. It's so fun to get to examine the book from, you know, and the show in this lens of like, we know what historians said. Now we're watching the true events of what happened.
Yeah, it is starting to feel like the truth of its canon is basically like what, as according to George R. R. Martin, is that it's like you know, it's like oh crap, what's the movie with just a historically inaccurate history movie. The Mel Gibson movie. What's that? What's
Braveheart?
The Patriot?
Braveheart. Thank you.
Braveheart. Oh, yeah.
Is essentially the Braveheart of the
right.
Like it's not. I mean, certainly more accurate than Braveheart was, but
the show has Dragon, so maybe not.
But like this is essentially like a dramatization of actual history, and maybe they didn't get it right in the book either, but like this is just maybe another take. Maybe they have new sources, and so they're like doing that, but then in the process they've cut some characters in order to make things so on and so forth. Either way, I do prefer the idea that like how can I fit the two together so that they still make sense. And you know, I think you can still mostly do that with a couple of maybe exceptions that are
I like to invite a comparison because like one of the main things about Game of Thrones is, one, we don't have the last few books.
Right.
Again, main. So
it's a huge problem.
But even before that, yeah, that's a huge problem. But even before that, they were deviating from the book, which has tons of character development, tons and tons of scenes and dialogue and stuff like that, and they completely just said nope. And the Fire and Blood is like a rough outline. So because there's not character motivations in it, because it's just kind of like a dry telling, this show can put all that characterization and depth into it and you not feel bad about it. And I want to make the comparison to like Bridgerton versus Queen Charlotte. For all my Bridgerton stands out there, like Bridgerton, as somebody who's read the Bridgerton books, and we're only on season 3, and I'm already like, wow, you are deviating from the book so badly to the point where it's pissing me off, to then watching Queen Charlotte that didn't have a book, that they actually came out with a book after it, which is the greatest season of Bridgerton out of the 4. Like sometimes when it comes to books and adaptations, less can be more. When it comes to adapting books into TV shows.
I mean, that was always kind of like the thing, right? Like the whole Star Wars expanded universe was just like a whole, not to say that like all of those were great, but like that, I feel like that's what it was in the past, is that like you would do more stuff in universe. If you were adapting something, it was like, well, I'm going to write a story about these characters doing something else, because that was sort of like more in line with how media worked back in the day. Whereas like now it's just all about the adaptation all the time, I think, because you know, even though we are in the world of the multiverse, you know, it's but I personally like it. I enjoy, even when the adaptation doesn't work, I still enjoy seeing the process of it. I don't know why exactly, but something about it really fascinates me, the different decisions that are made and why they're made, and if they were good or if they were not good. I'm excited to sort of explore what works and what doesn't work and why. And I think that oftentimes things can be better. And then sometimes things can be worse. But I think the way I often try to look at it is like, when it's better, that's awesome, I just saw a better version. And when it's worse, well, I'm just going to remember the other version instead.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
why
a
you would
win-win.
be a great wrestling fan, Taran. I'm telling you, you have
pretty
a very
true.
strong suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into it then, because as we come through season 2, there has been probably, I think we are diverting further from the source material than season 1, in a few different ways. And I think that one of, maybe not the primary ways so far, but like the big thing immediately in season 2 was Blood and Cheese, that we were all like sort of anticipating Blood and Cheese. And it was certainly kind of less gruesome, intense,
Right.
many kinds of words to describe it, than it was in the books, or in the books, in the book.
It will be books. It will be books eventually.
I should say in the paragraph,
actually,
because it was probably just a paragraph.
Darren, you're actually not wrong, because Fire and Blood is partially like the Road Prince and these other books that then became Fire and Blood. So you're not wrong, actually.
It's that is true, but but what we are adapting is like one sliver of the book.
Correct. Yeah. When I brag, they're like, oh, I reread Fire and Blood. It's like to like catch up with it. Like I actually just read like 14 pages.
Like I read an essay. Yeah.
I just re-listened to what it'll probably be this whole season in an hour on my audiobook, because I realized, I was like, wow, this whole season is just literally this one chapter in this book.
Yeah. I actually did. I went back and reread from the beginning of like I think I even did Jaehaerys's reign, but I have to remember whether I just did the start of Viserys's reign. But alas, Blood and Cheese to me is really interesting, because I think that I was so hyped for House of the Dragon to premiere as a show, like season 1, and I thought season 1 mostly lived up to my expectations, even if it was totally different than what I thought it was going to be. Season 2, I had this thing. I was at home and I was talking to my mom before I came back today, and I remember talking about like this might be one of those moments where like people, because their source material attached, like the Red Wedding. I think there was the moment of the Red Wedding, and then there was the YouTube sensation of the Red Wedding reactions. And I wondered whether we were going to get that with Blood and Cheese to an extent, and we didn't. And I quickly realized, like, oh, I completely miscalculated what Blood and Cheese means as a moment in the show. Yeah. And so I think for me, I didn't like the adaptation, but for none of the reasons that I keep seeing people being like, I didn't like Blood and Cheese. People wanted it to be as dark and gross as it is in the book. I did not want that. I just need to put that on record. It's exactly how I feel every week, where I'm like when you're like, I don't like The Acolyte, but not for the reasons everyone else does. You know, I want to be like, I don't need it to be exactly the way it's written. What I think is the like misservice in the episode of Blood and Cheese is who we spent time on. Ultimately, Blood and Cheese, and they don't get named in the episode, but they don't really matter. What matters is the people who are involved. And I think, like, if I'm to look back on it, what I think that they did exceptionally well is the aftermath of Blood and Cheese. And that's what makes that moment important, is how it affects Helena and Alicent and Rhaenyra and Daemon and all the people who are involved in setting up what happens, rather than the actual moment. And the moment was even less impactful because we don't really know, mostly Jaehaerys. And that's fine, because like we don't really need to know this kid who's just going to die. So I say that I didn't really love, as beautiful as it was, I didn't like the like meandering through the castle. I think it's like interesting maybe, but not what I think they should have done. But I didn't need it to be darker. And I will say this, I don't think Blood and Cheese for me as a TV moment worked, but it does work as a thing that then is important moving forward.
Yeah, now that you mention that, like the idea struck me, like, would it have been better? And I'm sure they thought of this, but like, would it have been better to have done the entire scene from like Helena's perspective? Where like it's like a day in the life of Helena. Maybe even the whole episode is from her perspective, like sort of like it's following her and the impact that Aegon has on her and what he's doing. And
Hey, we get a little bit of Aegon being like, I will do anything for my little boy. And it's like a little bit, but it's not like enough for me to be like, all right, it worked, you know, for me.
Right. And then like, you know, certainly I think you have to tee up that Daemon is about to do something shady. But then, you know, out of nowhere, these two characters show up and then horror happens. You know, maybe that telegraphs it too much. Maybe, you know, again, I'm sure they thought of this. I'm sure they workshopped it. But like, I do think there's a world where that might have lent the moment more impact, given the fact that we didn't really spend much time with certainly the children, but even Helena much prior to this.
We haven't really spent much time with Helena after. There's a really great scene between her and Alicent, and other than that, it's not really in the show that much.
Yeah.
But I also say that like Blood and Cheese and the significance of it, like, yes, us book readers, we were so excited. We couldn't wait. But I don't know if it's necessarily not the Red Wedding because it's not as significant. I just think it's not the Red Wedding because we are now extremely desensitized to violence when it comes to
that's fair.
What makes the Red Wedding, I think, impactful was not the violence of it. Was not. I mean, it certainly contributed, but like, what makes it, I think, so impactful is it's how it's narratively set up, where it's like, when Ned dies, it feels like this big hit, but it feels almost like it's kind of right. Like this is still kind of like the inciting incident of the entire thing, even though it's the end of the first book / season. And it feels like, okay, but now we hate this, but we're going to get revenge. And the person carrying that torch the most seemed to be Rob. And so when that fails too, that feels like the legs get cut out from under you. And you're so invested in that because it's not just those characters in that moment. It's that those characters were carrying that torch that Ned had in season 1. And so it comes all the way back. There's so much history there. And it's just like, I now have to admit that we lost. That like this is over now. We've been trying for 3 seasons, for 4 seasons. I don't remember how many seasons, but for 3 books to make this, to like make this right. And we finally have to give up and admit we lost and try to go another route. And I think that's really the meat of the Red Wedding. And obviously Blood and Cheese has none of that narrative weight.
Yes, not a lot of history going into it, not much attachment to Jaehaerys as a whole, but also like I remember reading the Red Wedding. I remember Christmas Eve reading that book and crying, and my mom just coming down the stairs like, what is going on? And I'm like, they killed them all, just reading. So it's also, you know, for us book readers who knew what was coming, because those were the people holding the cameras for the reactions of their significant others or their friends who didn't know what was coming. It's also that attachment that we got from the books, not only just the characters from the TV show. Like the oh my god, the Red Wedding, if you haven't go read the chapter, Catelyn's chapter of the Red Wedding. It is heartbreaking. It is a mother watching everything that she's worked for. Yes, just
the way I sped through that chapter with all the descriptions of the food and everything. I was just like, I know something's happening here.
It was you know those like gift cards that open up and they play music. You had one of those versions that plays Reigns of Castamere. And you're like, okay, right? Definitely. I think the other Blood and Cheese thing that I think in lieu of trying to keep a mystery involved with what's going to happen and setting that up to be go find Aemond, but what if we don't find Aemond? Black screen, like we cut. For me, A Son for a Son is like, it's the name of the episode. I think it's so important. Like I think in the book, like it does. I like. There's just there's no confirmation that it's not Rhaenyra, right? Like again, like with the book, there's lots of this like we don't really know what happened, like, but these are the rumors, and so obviously it would be like, oh yeah, Rhaenyra would be like a son for a son, or Daemon would be like a son, but it's like Daemon's son didn't die, like yeah, whatever. But so I just wish the articulation of that was a little bit stronger. Of like, I didn't like the way we removed some of Damon's culpability of what happened. And I know we like get it. Like once Rhaenyra and Daemon have a fight, which I think is like one of the best scenes. Shannon, Gus, and I used to talk all the time. Like the best Crown episodes are two people in a room fighting. And I feel like that's like coming through here to me. That's like, maybe it might be my thesis statement for like what makes good TV is like, if you could get two people in a room in a really good fight, it's really good TV. The Daemon Rhaenyra scene is really strong. And I think it like probably is worth it to have some ambiguity in Daemon's and whatever, and to build that. But I almost think like the mystery of that, like in lieu of trying to build the mystery, they remove that thing where Daemon, and then it's like comes up in Blood and Cheese of like, no, he said a son for a son. And I don't think that that's as effective as if we had seen Daemon say like a son for a son. And yeah, it's just I just think Blood and Cheese didn't like completely nail it.
I do agree. I will say, like, I don't want to be like I want to be generous to Ryan Condal, and I think that there's a lot of great stuff that the show is doing. But I definitely do personally get kind of a vibe from the show that like they had to do Blood and Cheese. And they didn't exactly know how to fit it into their way of telling the story. And so they just kind of like did it as best as they could. And we're just kind of like, well, and now let's kind of, we'll still talk about some of the impact, but like, let's just kind of move on from it, because like it was certainly not a centerpiece for them. And I'm not sure they understood how to fit it in to everything else. And so I think maybe for those reasons, it felt a little bit like, this is a big moment. We know we have to have it in here. It just doesn't quite fit with our story. So we're just going to do it. We're just going to do it, and we'll do our best with it.
Mari, I feel like the moment for me from season 1 that most exemplifies the problems I sometimes have with House of the Dragon, even if I love the show, it's probably the show I'm most invested in. A Song of Ice and Fire and the Game of Thrones universe is the media property I'm most invested in. So take that for what you will. In terms of every time I talk about the show, just know I'm completely biased because I want it all to work. But the problem I have is the Rhaenys coming through the floor scene is the show trying to, and this is going to sound so wild, so bear with me, trying to make TV moments. Okay. And that sounds wild because it's a television show.
It's a television show, yeah.
But I do feel like Blood and Cheese is the same. There's like a little bit of this every once in a while. I mean, the end of episode 3, which I am a huge hater on. And again, the scene between Rhaenyra and Alicent is fine for the content of the conversation. But it's like, what if we dressed Rhaenyra up as a septa? It's so like, this would be a moment. And it's just not working for me, because I feel like what Game of Thrones was at its core, and the Red Wedding is a great example of this. It's like, it is TV, and we'll create TV moments, but it's also nothing like you've seen on TV, because it has a realism of like, the things that like Ned getting his head cut off is like, that's what Joffrey would do. And I don't care that he is the most well-known actor on the show. He's getting his head chopped off. He's not going to be on the show. We're not going to pay Sean Bean to be on the show anymore. And even this show, which I do love, is being like, remember how Millie Alcock is like a great actress? We're also going to have her still on the show, even though we made a choice to like, she's going to be and I don't mind it. I don't mind, but I'm like, there are ways in which they are trying to be TV that doesn't feel like prestige TV sometimes.
I mean, I can see that, but I still do feel like they're working in bounds of the source material, but also, like Taran said, trying to adapt it to what they want it to be. I think one of the major things that we've talked about over the past 4 episodes is Rhaenyra's characterization. We just joked about it at the beginning. Like in the show, she's much more gentle than what she comes across in the book. But then after rereading the book, I realized I forgot how crippled by grief she really was in the book. So once I reread that, re-listened to it, I was like, okay, so this is kind of an accurate portrayal of her character. And with Blood and Cheese, it was always like, I always thought Daemon was behind it. I never really blamed Rhaenyra for Blood and Cheese. Like, Daemon was the one who sent her a message from Harrenhal saying, a son for a son. Don't worry, I got this. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know how I feel, because half of me at first was like, man, I need Rhaenyra to like sit up and let's go. But I remember what's coming up and I'm like, oh right. Like so she needs a little pushing to do that. And I do think that they're making her look very lenient. They definitely, you guys have talked about it, we've talked about it. They really are they are really trying to get people to stay on her side. But they're doing
it for Chappelle.
Except for Chappelle. Yeah. But they're doing it in a way that I'm like, but I also feel like you're kind of making her look weak when I don't think she was ever that. Especially with the most like recent development when it comes to like not her not wanting to go to war, but I'm trying to think of the word, but like she like her not having the host, like the whole distraction that is Harrenhal. Like, remember, Burning Mill was supposed to be kind of a win for the Blacks. Harrenhal was supposed to be a big win for the Blacks. Like, at this point, they were supposed to have a few wins under their belt, to the point that Aegon was sweating so much that he made the Kristen Cole call. I don't get that feeling here. I feel like they are the consummate underdog. And I get that's the choice that they made for TV, that I don't know if I like it. Chappelle said, he said he thinks it's going to be good because we all know where it's going. But I still don't know if I like the underdog situation, because like Grace said, that's like every other TV show.
Yeah, I'm of two minds on the Rhaenyra characterization. I think there are, from my perspective at least, there are a lot of people who are just like really just upset with the Rhaenyra characterization, that she's too soft, and that they want like fire and blood Rhaenyra to be raining fire and blood. And while I do get that, I do personally prefer a softer characterization, because I think it makes the character more interesting, in the same way that Aegon's character is more interesting in the way that he has been portrayed. I think a bit softer in the show than the books. And I think most of the characters are a bit softer in general. And I think that's a good thing, because these are people that we're talking about and not just, names in a history book. And so I like it. I think that they occasionally step too far in that direction. And I think that the Alicent conversation is like the blazing example of that. Like, that was just, for me, just a step too far. And to Grace's point, I think it really was just like, we need to get these two actors in the same spot again so that they can have to be together. And it's just like, no, you didn't. Like, you really didn't. And I'm still a little bit, iffy on the way that they're using the prophecy to try to use that as like justification for Rhaenyra. I don't mind it. Like, in the same way that I don't mind Alicent clearly lying to herself about her misinterpretation, I don't mind it if Rhaenyra is clearly lying to herself about the prophecy being her justification, when we all know she would be doing this with or without the prophecy. But I don't know that that is really being clearly said to me. And in fact, I think this new storyline with Alicent is kind of trying to make it even more clear that, like, man, without that misinterpretation, who knows what would have happened. It's like, really though? Like, we're really putting that much in Westerosi history on a dead man, a dying man's last words? Right. But but I think in general,
the recap kickback, because Chappelle did a great job of explaining how even if that misunderstanding never happened, this was always going to happen.
Exactly.
100%. I the princess, I like the way, like, I like the prophecy being here. I don't like the misunderstanding. I wish maybe it was done a little differently. Like, I think there's actually a much clearer way you could have gone about, where Alicent believes that Aegon is the one who has to be, which is that the prophecy is called The Prince Who Was Promised. And you just have Alicent be like, well, if it's a prince, then it has to be Aegon. It can't be you. Like, you're not a prince, you're a princess. So there's such a but whatever, it doesn't matter. We've talked about this a million times. I do think what I like about the Rhaenyra thing, and I think the reason they're bumping up against a little bit of like how to portray her, is that this is a section of the book where she doesn't really do anything. And I think that this is what their issue is like, I think they're trying to find justification for like why they aren't sending more dragons out, why they aren't doing some of this stuff. And some of that I think makes total sense of like, we have more dragons, not that many. And as we just saw, like Vhagar can crush their biggest dragon. So I think that like that all makes sense. But I do like the characterization, even just from the fact of like, if you again, the way that we talk about why this is such an interesting book to interpret or to adapt, that if you take what like the Archmaester writes and take it verbatim and you choose one of their like one of the histories that you think is the most accurate, like yeah, Aegon is like a spiteful little boy, Aemond is like this revenge hungry, you know, like all of them would be the most extreme versions of themselves. Rhaenyra would be sort of the like spiteful queen that got her crown taken from her, and then she's just like not. And I think that this show, more than Game of Thrones for me, I love the way like the small folk stuff has been woven into it, in terms of like that seems to be Rhaenyra's biggest thing. I go back to the fight at the end of season 1, where she's like, if I burn down all of Westeros, then what am I going to rule over? And that seems to be super pervasive for her, of like wanting to maintain the peace that her father had, and also thinking, I think because her father told her she was the right person, that she can do, like she has this idea that she will unite them, and if you go to war, you are therefore not uniting Westeros.
You know what I think
that she is the one who will unite them.
You know what I think would be, I don't know if I want this necessarily, but like, especially because like I really love the idea of the prophecy and it being the impetus for like Aegon the Conqueror conquering Westeros and all of that. But we've always talked about like, well, once we know the end result of it being Game of Thrones, it's kind of like stupid. I don't hate the idea of like somehow in this show at the end, like we realized that the prophecy was fake all along, and it was just a fake justification for Aegon to conquer Westeros.
Can you do that though when the prophecy is real? The prophecy
I know,
is real.
It's hard to like prove that the prophecy is fake in real time. But like I don't know, maybe I fit that into my own headcanon, that like it never was a real prophecy. That it was just something that Aegon made up to justify his own desire to conquer Westeros. And because there's always been this mystery.
Because it's such a great prophecy. Like if you read the like all of the Game of Thrones books, there's so many prophecies within that series, and they're all so good, and they're all like I think of like Maggie the Toad prophecies. Like I think of like it's just there's so many different prophecies that I'm still waiting on these last 2 books to see it, how they come out, because I refuse to believe that he will end these books how that show ended.
I think even if that's what he told
Mari,
them, he can't do it now, right?
I don't think he's ending the series, period.
Who's the Brandon Sanderson of Game of Thrones? You know,
there is none. He said he doesn't want it.
Did he write the book?
Yeah, but if he's alive, that's fine.
He hated the reception, and he's like, "I'll just wait till I'm gone to release these books." So that
that's funny. If like they get released posthumously,
yeah.
Okay.
I just don't like. I'm just mad. I think the prophecies are such a big part of the original books, and they're so fun, from the small little ones to like the big ones, that to just completely disregard one of the biggest one. It sucks, but I understand that.
Can I ask you a question? Why do they keep the prophecy a secret?
I know. I also had that question. It's because it is such a good like piece of propaganda.
Yeah.
Is it because like if it's out there, like people will start to not believe it, like happens in the show, right? Like in Game of Thrones, like people start to they don't believe. So then like is the idea like the more we hold on to it, and like I can use it, I don't think like Rhaenyra is using it intentionally against Jace, but if like Aegon is thinking like if I pass down this prophecy, then like they'll do it, you know, so that Jace will fall in line. He's been so mad at his mom, like now he'll fall in line. Is that it? Is that the reason to not?
I think that's a pretty silly reason.
Well, I'm wondering. I mean, the reason to not say it is because like that's the juice of the some of the show, but like, or not like the juice, but like that's what the show is choosing to do. I don't know.
And didn't you guys ask like how does the prophecy get to Game of Thrones if it's only passed through air to air?
Yeah, I do think, and I was trying to remember this from actually Mari, you're a gripper. Like in Game of Thrones, people just know the prophecy, right? Is that what happens?
I don't think they
It's
know like the
no.
extent of it.
But
Like,
is it a thing
It's
where
the
like
Red
it became
Woman who knows it, right? It's
okay?
Melisandre.
All right, I
well,
was trying to
there
remember how
is,
this. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh no, there's
there
like
is
3
this
different ones.
like prophecy slash religion almost surrounding the prince
Yeah.
that was promised. But to my knowledge, it was not. They don't know what this specific prophecy is, that a Targaryen must hold the throne
Yeah.
to face the whatever. It's more like sort of like echoes over history. Like the prince that was promised is like a symbolic thing that persisted, but like they don't seem to necessarily, or I guess the masses maybe don't know the specifics. Maybe Melisandre did. I don't know.
Okay, so
Mhm.
I have
true.
there's the game of the a wiki of Vice and Fire is pretty great. I use it
Amazing.
all
Yeah.
the time. There is a Prince That Was Promised prophecy wiki page. It seems that like Melisandre
Yeah.
talks about that like a priestess of roller like prophesized this 5,000 years ago, but in terms of stuff that happens in the books, wiki of Vice and Fire is like book stuff, not necessarily show stuff.
Yeah.
Dany's brother appears in one of her visions and relates it. So that would seem to be in line with like it gets passed down
Oh,
through Targaryen stuff.
that's pretty
Jorah,
cool.
yeah, Daenerys mentions her brother and says it to Jorah. And Jorah talks about if Aegon was the prince that was promised, the promise was broken along with his skull in the Lannisters class. You know, there's so that seems to be
Mhm.
it just seems to be mostly so Melisandre, and what I'm looking at is like a
'Cause
yeah.
there's been a debate, of is the Azor Ahai prophecy the same as the Prince That Was Promised
Mhm.
prophecy? Like, because they didn't even address that in Game of Thrones, like the whole Azor Ahai reborn, this and this a thing, even though I guess technically Jon did kinda kill
The
I
other
don't
person
know.
who knows about it is Master Aemon, and that would track that it's only Targaryens who know. So, like, yeah,
That's
it does
true.
seem like it in my head, I was thinking like everybody knows about it in Game of Thrones, and that's not true. And I was thinking like maybe it'd be interesting to see if in the show somebody is like we get the hints, kind of like with Dany's eggs, of like here's how Dany's eggs get over to get overseas. I thought it would be interesting if like we see how like it gets spilled, but it seems like it doesn't. It just ends up
Passed passed down
Danny
the
and
Yeah.
Aemon are like the only people who know
So
about it.
like the Lord of Light, I am
Yeah,
not a
Lord of
lore
Light.
expert. There's probably people that know this, but like it definitely I think could be read as sort of a game of telephone from like OG
Mhm.
prophecy down to this idea of the Lord of Light being a god savior against the others, and which Lord of Light, like the Heart of
The tar
Fire, right? Like
Mhm.
that makes sense as a Targaryen theoretically,
Mhm.
but like the
Close to
details get
God.
lost and it becomes a
Well,
religion,
that's
kind of
even
making
true that like
sense.
Samuel Tarly like he talks about the rumors of Danny, and then Aemon brings up the prophecy, and then he says, "Oh, and there's like a mistranslation of it, which is that it's not a prince; it could be a
Could
princess."
be a princess, yeah, because
So
dragons are like, yeah.
Yeah,
and
this is us trying to do theory on the spot, and I'm sure there are like
Oh my
much
gosh,
better
people like
yeah,
videos
I
that
can't
are
believe I didn't
explaining
type
all of
in. I can't believe I didn't type
not
this
us
in and just
going
put
down
Reddit,
the rabbit
and I
hole.
would have found the answer immediately. But
Yeah, not us going down the rabbit hole. Stuff that I did 13 years ago, mind you.
it.
Like stuff that we were in the thick
It's
of Game of
wild how
Thrones
long ago it's
Googling.
been.
I know, right? Exactly. But yeah, let's okay. Blood and
I
cheese,
was in
though.
college the last time I read a book from the series.
I think we have
I
to be
had
done with
just
blood and cheese,
graduated.
unless you have other things to say about blood and cheese, Mari. But
I
are
know,
there
I
any?
don't.
Yeah, okay. Like,
Other than I didn't like it. I didn't like
yeah.
and I said it just because I felt like the emotion of it was kind of hindered. Um, I think not having Allison in the room to me was the biggest faux pas of it. Like, I kind of wish she was in that room. But like you said, Grace, the aftermath carried it for me. So I was fine once we
So
got
I
past
think I think it
yeah.
was fine, and it's
that.
just I think from book reader perspective, it was like a little bit of a missed opportunity. It could have
I
been
I
better,
I
but I
actually
think
also
from
think
a
it was fine, just as a
yeah, from a
clarification.
show viewer perspective only, especially, I think it was perfectly fine, and they wouldn't think it's
Yeah,
bad by
they
any
wouldn't
Can
care.
means.
Okay, so you talked about I think one thing we didn't actually turn you and I didn't really talk about this on the show this week, which is this is a deviation from not a deviation from the book. Again, there's no way for this to be a deviation from the book, which is that the Kristen Cole and Allison, I almost said Allison Cole, I think that's a
Mhm.
Freudian
Oof.
slip. There's the scene where when this happens, Helena goes with I guess the other thing we should talk about is like I mean, there is one more thing to talk about Blood and Cheese, which is that there's a whole child missing, which we'll get into.
Mainly the missing. Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
But in this latest episode, Allison drinks moon tea. Seemingly, the implication, I presume, I don't know how you can read this any other way, that she thinks she's pregnant with a baby from Kristen Cole and decides not to have that baby. I feel like that's further stuff of like we talked about this, like when the second episode I think ends with them like fighting and then having sex. I think that's like the end of the second episode. I hate that. I do not like it. I do like them being in a relationship, and I think that like it feeds so much of both of their characters. Like I love this week's like Kristen Cole. We didn't really give him enough kudos, I think, for like him like going to and just Taran, you asked the other week, you were like, is Kristen Cole actually maybe like secretly supposed to be a genius on the show? And I don't know that that's true, but he also
got it doing well.
Yeah, he is like he does get knocked off the course this week, but he also gives like when he sees Aegon like flying overhead, he gives this like rousing religious speech to the people. So I think one of the things I'm most surprised by in terms of just like depictions of characters is the Kristens. Allison, I think, is probably the most interesting character. Aemon to me is probably still my favorite, but I think this stuff is to me has been very interesting so far.
Yeah, Kristen Cole, they have absolutely nailed his characterization. I've never wanted to punch somebody in the face more than Kristen Cole. And that's exactly how, for me, he came off in the books.
Go further, chop his head off.
Right. Yeah, the self-righteous like BS, just it does it for me with his character. So like I can't wait for his downfall. And it's in such a different way. Like, you know how people every time a Game of Thrones big bad comes on, they're like, oh, is he as bad as Joffrey? Is he as bad as Ramsay? It's like, to me, Kristen Cole is in that league, but they did a good job of bringing us a different character and not just recycling that old tired like whiny evil brat type of trope. This
guy made me feel bad for Otto Hightower.
Right. I think what's great about Kristen Cole is that unlike Ramsay or Joffrey, like he's not just a little shit. Like he is, but people don't really view him that way. Like the people around him, like everybody was like, oh, fucking Joffrey. And certainly they were like, ooh, Ramsay. But like Kristen Cole is a much more realistic and sinister version of like toxic masculinity that is rewarded and praised and respected by his peers. And that is almost more hateable, I think.
How is he going to fail upwards after Aegon falls from a dragon? It's like, what promotion will he possibly get?
Again, go and listen to Chappelle can spin anything for Team Green. He tried to convince me that Aegon getting flamed.
Chappelle supporting toxic masculinity makes sense. Yeah, I get it.
Makes so much sense, right? Yeah. he tried to convince me that Kristen Cole leaving a battlefield where the king is like severely crippled and maimed is actually a good thing for their side. And I was like, okay, sure. Like
but yes, the relationship, I think we've talked about this a little bit, but like I think it's working for me. I think it makes sense for both of their characters. I do think the moon tea stuff is a great element for the show to again call back to the connection between her and Rhaenyra, and the fact that Rhaenyra also took some moon tea also right after a night with Kristen Cole.
That's like so
and the hypocrisy. Like, I love it.
She drops Viserys' dragon. Yeah. I think they have done a really good job with like the symmetry stuff, in which like I talked about this, like every episode I would talk about The Last of Us. I'd be like, ooh, that made a previous episode better. I feel like this will be a pretty rewarding rewatch once we get to the end, in terms of like how much they seed things and create these parallels that are really interesting. It's a good call, Taran.
Yeah. So I think that's great. Let's see what else do we should we talk about like the big, episode 4. I think the thing that everyone is talking about is the dragon fight, the dance, I should say.
No, they renamed the episode.
They renamed it. Yep.
It's the red dragon and the gold. Isn't that's what it's called? I think.
I read that it was never officially named. what was the Dance with the Dragons?
That's yeah. I don't. Yeah, but it's
like,
that was like
the episode titles before the episode.
I think
that's fine, but whatever.
I think it's because they named that for one of the Game of Thrones episodes, and I think they forgot that they named it that, and then they had to rename. But the Red Dragon and the Gold is literally the name of the chapter that this whole season is adapted from.
There you go.
It works. But yeah, you guys got to talk about Rook's Rest within the confines of the show. What are your thoughts about the deviation from the book that the show took vis-a-vis Aemon, like deliberately blaming Aemon?
I love that. There's only, I think Taran will speak to the thing that I think works the least best. It's interesting because I actually think this is an example where, and I feel bad because I know that there are people who like listen to these and are like, I don't really care what the book says. I only want you to talk about the show. But I do think there's a line in the book that says like, if it was Melee's against Vhagar, this might have had a chance. That's the wording. And I think that like what Taran, what you pointed out last night, and like it didn't really sit with me, and I like kind of just like, again, I want to love House of the Dragon, so I just bought into it, which is Rhaenys turning around twice, like fully, like they linger on the moments of her being like, well, we gotta go back. She turns around and goes back.
Dragon experts have since told me that Vhagar would not be able to keep up if she had run.
That's what I said on the show too.
Right. So it makes less sense that she goes back, right? Because you wanted the scene of like, but yeah, there's a lot of that of like smaller dragons are not as strong, but they are more like evasive. Swift. And even I think that Aemond, Luke fight, they talk about like Luke might have been able to get away if it wasn't so like cloudy and he didn't know
the storm where
like there's a storm, right? So that's like the problem he had. So in this, I think that makes it worse that like Rhaenys couldn't have just like flown, like, or that she could have flown away. She could have gotten away from Vhagar, because I think once you've downed a dragon and a king, you get the F out of there. But I like the change of everything leading up to this moment of like Rhaenys thinking she's going into no dragons, and then then the Team Green realizing like, oh my God, why is Aegon here? I like that, and I love the Aemon stuff. I think the Aemon, again, for my money, the most interesting character on Team Green, and maybe for my money on both sides. I love this, and I again was unsure about like the scene last week where he's in the brothel, but I think it works perfectly of like the guy who and I maybe wish there was a little bit more like Kristen Cole. Like I wish there was a little bit more like not showing like, and you talked about this, Taran, about like the like not telling Aegon the plans. Like I maybe want a little bit more of like looping Aegon in, realizing how, and then there's this moment where he can capitalize on it and not undermining him before that. But other than that, I really like the idea that like Aegon shows up by surprise, Aemon finds a moment, takes out Aegon, basically.
Yeah, there is a line in the book, and I don't have it in front of me, but like it's something along the lines of like, Rhaenys didn't think to run away or something along those lines, right? And so I like maybe that's where those scenes came from. But like to me, there's a distinct difference between, at least the way I read that line, as like she held her ground and like didn't give up in a hopeless situation or a near hopeless situation, as opposed to like she had the opportunity to escape but didn't.
After taking out a dragon, I think that's the biggest like thing. Yeah.
Because like I think just and again, this is just for me at least, but I have seen this sentiment echoed since Sunday night, that like for me it's solved by just making a small change, which is that like she couldn't have gotten away, but she still had an opportunity to like, you know, to surrender, or to like to try to run, but she would have been caught, or like, you know, like some kind of thing where it's like,
could have been wounded,
it seems
enough
hopeless, but I'm going back, like I'm still gonna try, I'm not gonna give up. Like that to me is more impactful than like, wait, why is she turning around?
Melee's could have been injured enough that she couldn't have outrun like Vhagar too.
Right, yeah, like she tries to fly, realizes I'm never gonna make it across the sea, and so instead of making the attempt and running, she's like, you know what, we just have to make this be our last stand then. Like that's just all we have left. And like just thinking about that makes me want to cry. As opposed to what I was feeling in that moment, which was confusion.
Run. No, yeah, that's why like
run.
Yeah, in the book it made more sense because like I was really shook that like when Sunfire and Melis were like tearing each other apart in the show, I was like, yes, this is great. I was sitting there like, where's Vhagar? Because in the book, Vhagar just falls on both of them, and then that's how like Sunfire goes down. That's how Melis goes down. And in the book they're like, who's to say if Vhagar lands on all of them? They all go crashing to the ground. Vhagar's the only one that rises unharmed, and who knows if Aemon really meant to accidentally hurt the king and all of that great stuff. And that's what makes more sense. However, I do love that they skewed that for the actual dragon battle, because the dragon battle was awesome. Like, so
I agree.
So it's weird because it's like we got to see 2 dragon battles, but it makes no sense because the Greens didn't press their advantage. It was kind of not 2-on-1. You know what I'm saying? Because they kind of waited and let each other attack. Then her getting up. I don't know why they let Melis and Rhaenys get up after Vhagar and Melis tangled the second time. You know what I'm saying? Like they could have just let her fall there, but I was like, nope, like she got to get up again. And it's just like, but we've already done the thing where she's turned back, and then now, like you said, Taran, she's like flying, but she's flying in the one spot that she can't see. And so Vhagar could sneak his big butt up there and get her. It just, like it there were some small parts that were like, this was stupid, but because of the small stupid parts, we got that great awesome battle. So I'm just kind of like, I'll let it go.
I feel like that's been House of the Dragon for me, which is like,
yeah,
occasionally a thing that I kind of think is stupid that I have to kind of just like gloss over, because when it hits, it really hits. Grace, you're muted.
You're muted, Grace.
I'll take a time code. The other thing that I saw in terms of like a reason she would go back is the scene we saw in this episode where she sees Alan. And
yeah,
I don't think that there's quite enough there for me to feel like this works, but the theory is like she realizes Corlys has this like more going on than sort of that it does not sort of include her, and there's sort of this disagreement like whether or not you raise him up or whatever. I don't really buy that. That's a thing I've seen as like a defense of like, that's why Rhaenys turns around, is like she can, and to me, the more like logistical thing, I think it's like she thinks that it's their best shot to take down Vhagar. That to me is like, no matter how beaten and bruised she is, and I do think the like acting from Eve Best to look utterly exhausted, and the work from the makeup team and costuming was so good for her to look defeated that I'm like, you should not turn around, but she does. Is like I wish that there was like a line in the council meeting, or like I know that she doesn't think there's going to be dragons there, but something of like earlier of like, if you have a chance to take out a dragon, you have.
But that's stupid. They
I know it is
that.
stupid, so I don't know. I'm just like, I need one little thing more to like feel like that scene, like her turning around and choosing to go backward. The one thing I'll say is like, I agree with you, is that, and you could have done this without doing her turning around, is like, we also get the moment not only of like the dragon fight, but you get the moment, which I think is like the best articulated version of like dragons and dragon riders have a bond of them like looking each other in the eye as they're like falling. It's like that to me was like incredible. And I know there are some dragon haters out there, people who are like, I actually don't care about dragons in the show called House of the Dragons. For me, I love.
Are you just talking about Rob? Like,
yeah.
My friend Dr. Amanda also is like, I don't like dragons in House of the Dragon, but
do they still feel that way after this episode though? Because I feel like everyone's team dragon now.
No, she's not after this episode.
But you know what they could have done with the smallest little tweak that would have solved, I think, all of this? After Rhaenys and Aegon are tangling, I love Aegon's like look of relief when Aemon comes, and then Aemon like flames him. It reminds me of a play in Goose Goose Duck that we did once when Taran just sliced me after I was like, oh thank God it's Taran, and he sliced me.
Hilarious.
But like after that moment, right? So as Sunfire plummets to the earth and all that, Melis and Rhaenys are riding away, Aemond is on Vhagar staring at Sunfire on the ground. What would have been better was after he hit the flame, he kind of did what actually took them out, is as she's gonna fly towards Dragonstone, just have him pop up with the big Vhagar, not to hit her right then, but like to block her way and be like, where you going? Where you going?
It could have been that. It could have
by her brother.
I think there's a
brother.
yeah.
She fights it. She's like, this is my moment to get him,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't work, you know?
I think there's a bunch. I think there's a bunch of ways it could have worked. I think I personally.
All right, this is wrestling. Actually, we're just just trying to come up with wrestling finishes. Actually,
sorry, Jay,
in terms of Aemond taking the shot on Aegon, I do like this. There is a part of me that feels like it could have been set up a little more extensively. I think they had that whole sort of sequence in season 1 that was kind of alluding to this. And at the time I was like, oh, they're just kind of exploring potential motivations. Like Aegon talking about I would have married my sister, and like what about me? And like examining his connection to Daemon. But I think it makes a lot of sense to more actively sort of examine how connected Aemond is with Daemon, and how much he is maybe even more willing to take the shot that Daemon never did, and what that means for the two characters. I think that it feels a little clumsy to me to have like the brothel scene be the thing that leads into this. I think it's fine. I think it worked, and I think that like you get it and you understand where he's coming from now. Especially because a lot of his motivation, especially in the show, has seemingly come from the fact that he's been bullied. And so to have his brother do that to him again, especially, we're led to believe that this woman that he's with has been somebody that he's been like seeing for a very long time. And so to have
been he slept with, I think.
Yeah, like so, like the sense that like his very personal space has been invaded in that way. Might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Makes a lot of sense. I feel like I would have liked to see a little more of him in general to get the sense of this transformation. But that might just be coming from a book perspective where I didn't really expect it to happen. Whereas maybe a show viewer might have been like, yeah, that's exactly what I expected because of the scenes I've seen. So that's not like a real criticism, but I think I like the direction this is going in. What I particularly like about it is that I think it informs what comes next in terms of like how interesting things are going to get now that the sequence of events that are to come are directly a result of Aemon's choices that he actively made. And so that's interesting to me.
Yeah, and like you said, I think you just got to look at it as a culmination, and that the brothel is the straw that broke the camel's back. Because even when they're looking in the second to last episode in season 1, when they're looking around for Aegon, and Aemon's like, dog, why are we looking around for this dude who doesn't even want to be king? Like, I would be king. Like, so it's like a stacking. And the brothel scene is the last straw. I think him starting his get back at the council meeting by speaking the High Valyrian and embarrassing him was really good. So it doesn't feel like it comes out of left field like that much, but I can see what you mean by like a little bit more would have been great. But I love it.
I think the more I think about it though, like as you're saying it, like I think I'm convincing myself even more that it is just coming from a book perspective, and that like I'm probably asking them to show too much, that it probably would have been too telegraphed if they had shown more. And I think also like connecting it to like this felt like it wasn't planned. This felt like it was impulsive, which also tracks to how Luke died. And so it kind of makes sense, especially as like an escalation of like, it was almost pure accident the first time. This was more like, this kind of feels familiar.
And
this is an escalation of what happened before.
Get the best of him. I mean, it's Aegon's fault. You shouldn't drink and dragon. That's the problem.
I just think it shows how opportunistic Aemond is, and I love that, because that's what that, like, I'm gonna keep invoking Chappelle's name, because if you haven't watched Recap Kickback, what are you doing right now? But he was thinking that Aemond was plotting since the small council. I'm like, no, there's no way. I think the small council was just a little get back, a little embarrassment. But once he saw Aegon on that dragon drunk, he could have stopped. He could have stopped it right then and there. He saw him and Vhagar could have gone up at the same time. They could have met Meleys at the same time, and Aegon would have been fine. I think when he told Vhagar, he said, let's wait. Let's just wait.
Aemond was zigzagging all over the sky. It was painfully obvious to anyone that he was dragoning.
I think even that is like, all right, you think you can do it? Like, I know you can't do it. You know, like, I know, like, it doesn't even matter that he thinks he's going to lose or that he's drunk. I don't know. I just want to say, one thing I think about that with the Aemond and Aegon stuff is I think there's enough there. I don't know if the scenes are the most like amazing scenes that we could have got. And this is where I think like the book, like Fire and Blood adaptation and Game of Thrones adaptation, there's one thing that I think House of Dragon might continually sort of suffer from, which is that you don't get to just like pick a scene that George R.R. Martin wrote. You have, like, when there's stuff that's not in there, they have to write it. And I think the second brothel scene for me, like, it almost, again, I think like for most of the stuff where I think stuff doesn't work, I'm like, that's fine. I don't think it's bad. I almost think like there's only a few things that I think have been actively bad on the show. And I've said them. I think Rhaenys through the floor, Septa Rhaenyra, and that's basically it. Everything else, I'm like, I'll take it. That, you know, good to fine, you know, or whatever. And then some stuff I think is great. I think if you imagine that George R.R. Martin could have written, like, what scene would you have that sort of like tells me that Aemond is sick of Aegon? I think it's probably 10 times better than the brothel scene that we got, you know, and that's fine. I mean, George R.R. Martin didn't write, like, he's not actively writing on the show. He's writing Winds of Winter, as we all know. So, yeah,
of course. I recently watched the scene back where Aemond like rises with Vhagar, because I wanted to make a GIF of it to post on Twitter. And in the rewatch, it is actually, I feel like it was made very clear to me that like he very much was planning to like get up and get going, and then whoops, spots Aegon in the sky and goes, ooh, wait. Which definitely implies to me that like it was sort of like an impulsive in the
not
moment,
annoyed,
like,
but an opportunity.
Yes, exactly.
Well, yeah, he did call him an idiot though, and then was like, okay, well, let me let this idiot do what he's doing.
Exactly. So all right, anything else before we start talking future events?
The only thing the Cargill scene, I thought that like it felt a little cartoonish. I feel like you were higher on it maybe at the time than me, Taran. I did like, there's like an after the episode piece where they talk about that literally every scar or like thing that happens to one of them then happens to the other one. And I do wish that they did the thing at the end where Rhaenyra doesn't know which one is still alive and makes a ruthless choice. But in the vein of like Rhaenyra is the good person, they did not do that. Instead, they have Eric kill himself. Again, I think it's like fine. I think it's a fine choice. I think there was like a better, cooler version of that moment. But it's totally fine. And I really appreciate the care that they took to like map out how similar like basically that like that one gets like cut on the knee, and later like another one gets cut like at the back of the knee, and so it's like they basically like the fight matches what happens to each other in a way I really think is like good and interesting actually. So
yeah, I think I disagree. That I really was glad that they didn't do the like, oh, which one are you thing, because I was really like
basically complaining about them wanting to do a TV moment, and then
that's fully what I expected them to do, and it felt like it would have been a TV one, and also like it would have felt kind of stupid to me because like it's so easy. It'd just be like, what did I tell you at lunch yesterday? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
True.
Yeah. I absolutely loved Eric committing seppuku only because it just puts into perspective the thing that he was asked to do. Well, he wasn't even asked to do. Arik was asked to come over there and try and kill him. But it's like how this war itself has torn families apart, like not being able to live with himself, being a kinslayer and having to slay his kin because he has to take his duty and his oath seriously. Like that moment just was, it gave me chills, and it made me so sad, in a way that I don't know if I didn't think that fight was gonna do that, because again, in the book, it's a 2 lines. It's like they either fought till exhaustion, they both died, or it was really quick, one died and one died 4 days later. So, both of those options, I was like, "Well, I guess that I hope they go with the longer one," and they actually took those options and kind of merged them in a way that was really just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. I loved it. I loved every minute of that fight.
Yeah. All right. Should we move on then to some future events?
And
which will include current events as well, but they have future implications that I think we would not want to talk around. So, all right, let's do that then. Let's change back to Team Black as we move into future events.
Heavy spoilers.
Yes. We are now everything is fair game at this point. Anything in a Song of Ice and Fire history.
Okay, so I feel like it doesn't really it's not like, it's probably the worst thing to kick off this section with, but Maelor the Missing is very important in terms of the fact that I think you can't do a lot, like you can kind of do it, but it's harder to do the stuff you're doing with Aemond if there is a son. If Aegon has a son, the son would be very young. But in the book, there are 2 sons, and Blood and Cheese is actually depicted between, like, you have to pick between your 2 sons, and Helena picks her younger son, thinking that like he won't remember or no, and then Jaehaerys ultimately, they like reverse it and like, actually, we're just going to kill Jaehaerys, and now you have to live with the fact that you wanted that son to die. So Maelor is still around in the show, and also on the other side there are like missing children. And none of the children on Team Black are missing, but they're aged differently, I believe.
I think they're aged
right?
differently.
Yeah. So
which ones?
So I think all the younger children are alive. They're just younger than they, like Joffrey is younger. Is that right? Is that because he's not initially, I mean,
he's like 11 in the books.
So setting up Battle of the Gullet, which is where I actually think I think it's interesting to talk about where the season will end, and if it will be Battle of the Gullet, and whether that will happen before or after Rhaenyra takes King's Landing. Big spoiler.
I think I still think the taking of King's Landing is where we end.
I think so too. I didn't think so at the beginning of the season, but I do now think that makes the most sense. I think it feels like a finale more than Battle of the Gullet, and there's also rumor that they moved a battle out of season 2 into season 3, and I feel like you can start season 3 with Battle. I don't think we're getting Battle of the Gullet this season.
I think it makes sense to me narratively to end the season on what feels like a Rhaenyra win, considering we ended last season on certainly a loss, and as Mari, you pointed out, she has seemed like the underdog, taking loss after loss. Like even like Blood and Cheese does not feel like a win for her. Like Harrenhal certainly has not felt like a win for her.
Oh my god,
they've all felt like losses. So I think the end of season 2 needs to feel triumphant to a degree. It doesn't have to feel like super triumphant, but like definitely like a win, I think, is what I would expect narratively.
So the only 2 battles, Mari, left are Battle of the Gullet and the Battle of the Honeywine. Battle of the Honeywine basically has nobody that we know so far involved. So I don't think that's the battle that, I mean, it could be the battle that gets moved and it got filmed, but Battle of the Gullet, and again, this is speculation that they moved a battle. So we could get Battle of the Gullet, and then we could get the Fall of King's Landing.
So my other thing with Battle of the Gullet, and the reason why I don't think you would end on Battle of the Gullet, is because it'd be almost like ending right where we ended season 1. Rhaenyra losing a son. Like, why would we want to end there as well? I think we get Rhaenyra sitting on the throne, and I hope we get the bloody hand and the bloody legs.
I think it's exactly what we're gonna get. Is a prick of the finger or whatever. Yeah.
So now moving Battle of the Gullet to after the taking of King's Landing, feasibly you can do that, but then to me it kind of sucks, because then you lose Rhaenyra's motivation, because you know the death of one son broke her, the death of a second son spurned her, and she's all anger. And that's what leads to her taking King's Landing, is like she kind of just says screw it and takes it all into her own hands. However, I could see you still do the taking of King's Landing and have the Battle of the Gullet afterwards, and it still not be that bad. And I hope that if they do something like that, it is also better, because the one thing I'm worried about with Rhaenyra's character is it mirroring Dany's character, and how they very poorly did Dany's descent into like madness, because it wasn't a descent, it was a plummet. Like it happened in like one episode. It just like she just automatically just flipped the switch and was like, you know, I'm assuming the next season we're gonna get that slow decline, like that really slow decline into just cruelty for Rhaenyra. So I think you have to end on a triumphant note. If they move Battle of the Gullet on, I don't know, Taran, do you think I don't think it's much of a loss, to be quite honest, but I don't like when they do that. This Harren Hall thing is pissing me off. So
we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah,
okay.
so like,
but yeah, I think I mean, I think for me, and I think this is just probably how I would do it, is that I would not move Battle of the Gullet, because I think that we need to lose Chase sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because I think he's such a, like, I think he in the show, I'm very attached to him. And I don't think anybody expects to lose him this season if they haven't read the book.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is the closer analog to like a Red Wedding kind of event than it very much is. Like, we lost Luke, but that's okay because Jace is great. And what like he's our hope. But once we lose him, it's like we have no hope. And then we can maybe build up Joffrey a bit at some point, right? So
and it's I'm sorry, and it's just so interesting because like the Battle of the Gullet is the one battle that I always forget from this book. I'm always like, how did Jace die? Like always. But I do see what you mean. That would be the blow for your TV only viewers, because they're like, oh my God, well, what's going on? But then we also have to contend with, so are they still going to do the princes getting captured or what? Because that was confusing to me when they sent them off to the Vale.
I think they are, right?
Because so the only difference between like what happened here is that like Joffrey and Rhaena go to the Vale with eggs, instead of just the two of them with 3 dragon eggs, instead of going, and then the 2 younger ones, Viserys and Aegon the younger, go to Pentos. That's the plan. But I think that I think for the story, I think you can't have, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it's Viserys who gets, because Aegon flies the dragon, right? So Viserys, I think it'd be pretty weird to not have him because it's such a important part. Like, I don't know whether we'll get it on the show ever, but the idea that like they thought he was gone, they think he like, they don't know what happens to him, and then he shows up later and gets ransomed back and has like had this childhood across the sea. I think you have to do that. So I think we'll still get that. I think we'll still, but I think and then Aegon, I think his motivation can be the same. He can just leave Viserys on a dragon. Like, I'll go get help. I'm going to go. And he'll feel forever bad that then like Viserys gets captured. Joffrey, I don't know.
That moment is pivotal to how Aegon then ruled later. Of course, we won't probably see Aegon's rule later, but I still think it's a pivotal characterization moment for Aegon the Younger. But I say all that to say that I think I do think we'll get Battle of the Gullet. I think moving the Battle of the Honeywine to the 3rd season would make a lot more sense, because to introduce Daeron here at the last 2 episodes, I think would be too much. But if you kind of like introduce him at the beginning of the next season,
I think that makes sense.
That would feel better, and you can age him up if you want to, and we'll be like, oh, it's been at least 2 years, so it could be any time period when we come back. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like maybe you do that, because you have to. They mentioned him, so he has to show up. I don't know if he necessarily needs to show up in this season, but he could show up. He could definitely show up next season. I'm excited for the sewing. Yes.
Yeah. So I know that Abigail Thorne was cast as Shirako Lahar. I'm not gonna be.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I believe she's set to appear in season 2.
Okay.
So
Yay.
for whatever that's worth, like I think that probably speaks to
I think the fact, like, I do think like Rhaenyra losing another child, I do think you do have to have it in this season. And I think there is a world where we could have, with what was adapted, I think Rhaenyra, like, being like, I'm gonna go to King's Landing and visit Alicent and try to finish this war. Like, I don't think she seems like angry enough or motivated enough to make that big of a move to, like, basically sack one of the biggest cities in King's Landing. So I do think you need like another death, which sounds awful because she's already lost a child, but to like motivate her to take the most decisive action that she could. I feel like to just suddenly have her say, like, I'm going to King's Landing, I feel like could be seen as like, look how smart Rhaenyra is. She's going to actually make the one move that maybe like ends the war. I think you probably need like something else to motivate her. And so I think you have to keep Battle of the Gullet in the season. I think losing Jace, like, the only thing I hesitate on is like, the pace at which we're going to go through this story is so much quicker, and the amount of people we will lose over the course of this series, like, the more that they can draw that. But I think the fact that you can basically keep Daemon and Aemond in for another full season after this, I think is enough to sacrifice Jace in season 2 and have him die this season. So yeah.
Okay, well, let's then talk about Daemon at Harrenhal. It sounds like Mari might be with me on this, that like it's not quite, and I think people are very divided on it.
Very much
some people really love it. And I think part of it for me is that it's not really my, like, I love horror, but it's not really my genre of horror necessarily. And it's just not quite fitting for me. But yeah, Mari, what have been your thoughts?
It's just like, it's kind of like, what are we doing here? Like, I liked it when he first got there, and they were kind of playing with his mind, and the Alice the Wood Witch giving him that dire prophecy, love a good prophecy, that was great. But to drag it on for another episode, like, we're basically watching Daemon go through cognitive therapy. I don't care that you're trying to work. It
feels so disconnected too for me.
Yes, you're trying to work out your inner thought process of to betray Rhaenyra or not, or all of this stuff that I'm just like, I don't care, especially since I don't like that it's been undermining everything I've been saying about Daemon as well, because Daemon is like, you can call him an asshole, you can call him bloodthirsty, but the one thing he always did was he loved his family. He loved Viserys. He loved Rhaenyra. He did all of these things for the love of his family. So to have him sitting there questioning that kind of sucks to me, especially when I know that, like, in the book, yeah, Daemon and Rhaenyra didn't see eye to eye at this point in the war, but it never felt like they were going to turn on each other. Like, why are we kind of like teasing like a Team Black implosion when we're in the middle of a war? Why would Team Black implode when we're in the middle of a war? Like, so I don't know. I get it. There's always been tension between Daemon and Rhaenyra in the books here, with Nettles and all that stuff, but I never, even with the tension between their marriage, I never felt like he would never not have her back. And I don't know. Does that make sense?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head for me, because I feel like, because I have kind of been of two minds, but I like the magical lore ramification. I like that there's like a lot of interesting things to theorize about what this means, and like Alice Rivers and the different theories that are popping up about like ooh, what could spawn from this. I think that's kind of cool, but I think I agree with you. I think the thing that's really dragging it for me is where it's placed narratively, and how it functions with the relationships between the characters. Like, why is he just sitting here? And like, they had that fight, yes, but like, I don't know. It felt like it didn't feel motivated enough to me to have him just kind of go off, and like I said, it feels so disconnected both from the world but also from like those relationships. And so I just feel like maybe there was a way to do this that didn't feel like it was kind of wasting as much time as it is. But you know, but I can certainly understand why some people might like it. Grace.
I love it. Mary, I disagree with you about that Daemon loved his family. What Daemon loved about his family was the potential that they would love him and think he was the best person who ever existed and did all this amazing stuff and was cool and amazing and great. That's what he
different definitions of love here.
Yeah.
That's what he loved about being part of like a royal family, and the idea that like he could have been king. I mean, I do think it is like interesting that he is seeing young Rhaenyra. He is not seeing his like the version of Rhaenyra that we see now. He is seeing the version of Rhaenyra that he basically groomed to be able to marry, and she's his niece, and it's gross. And I think Daemon is interesting, and it's like, you know, support him as an individual, but I think this is all so in line with him. He is like, for the first, I mean, he's gone off before, but when he's left, he's gone to war basically. And here he like went to go do that and then just found this abandoned castle. And I mean, I'm really into the horror stuff. So it's like works for, and the magic stuff of Game of Thrones is some of my like favorites. So it again, and you know, everyone can call me biased because I said earlier, like I want to look for things to love in the show, but I do like it a lot. I think it's like some of the most interesting. I think Daemon is, I mean, I talked about Aemond and Alicent being the most interesting. I'd put Daemon right up there at the top of the list for me too. For what it's worth, I like this like slow down, but this is basically exactly, I mean, I won't spoil the bear, but this is exactly like everyone's like, it's not moving plot forward, it's not doing anything. And I'm like, yeah, but I just want to spend time with this like weird, this weird dude. And I am enjoying it and I like it. And I think that it all fits within his character in terms of like, would he not just go somewhere else? And I think that like he's tried everything to like win their attention and nothing has ever been like actually that successful. I mean, he married Rhaenyra, but now like she hates him and is like, has basically like lifted the veil on any like, you know, she called him out for who he is, which is like, you just wanted to be king. And so I think he's in his like, I don't really care, he's being a petulant child moment. And I think that tracks. I think I'm the same as you, Taran. I see the opposite side of being like, I don't think it makes sense, I don't find it interesting, I don't think it's going anywhere. Whatever reason people have to not like it, I am personally liking it. And I like it also because of how much foreshadowing I think it's going to have for the inevitable, like Aemon's going to come and take Harrenhal and be there, and he's going to have his thing with Alice Rivers, and then eventually the two of them are going to fight. So I feel like it is a lot of setup that I think is worth like waiting for, but I would totally get that other people are like, we got to move this along.
So this is my biggest fear with what's happening with Daemon, is that like, and there's still plenty of time, so I'm not that worried, but like, to me, these last two episodes as a viewer have like gotten me to the point where I'm like, yeah, he can die.
Oh,
just seems like it's inevitable at this point.
Yeah.
He's just kind of like lost himself. He's been told he's gonna die here. He's tripping all over the place. He's barely contributed to the story for episodes now. Like, I'm at the point where I'm like, his death doesn't really impact much. He hasn't had any impact in this show for a while, and he hasn't been himself in a while. And so I feel like I've already lost Daemon. And so I don't really care about his fate at the moment. I think they can get me back eventually, and we'll have some time to, but like, this has made me feel okay with losing him, and I don't want to feel okay with losing him.
Which is the exact opposite in the book, because in the book, he is her backbone. They say it several times. If we take out Daemon, he's the only person that's giving like Rhaenyra's cause strength. If we take him out, then she goes back, she bends the knee. You know what I'm saying? And that's what kind of like I keep talking about. I wish they had raised this host. Like, I'm so mad that they have not raised this host in the Riverlands yet, that he doesn't have his big army. the fact that he hasn't even sent the Ravens to let them know that he's like landed there is so ridiculous to me. He's put them in such a bad position because their enemies know more about his doings than they do, and he's like actively being a detriment to their war cause here, when again in the book he's like one of, I mean, her biggest strengths, but also her biggest weaknesses, because a lot of his enemies come up against them. But still, like, I don't like that it's feeling like they're neutering Damon in these last 2 episodes, because he's the one who kind of feels neutered. You know, he's walking around this castle sulking.
I will say there's something I like about the idea of, like, from the perspective of history, this man was the backbone of Rhaenyra, when in reality he was just like a complete liability the whole time. But like the historians were so sexist that, like, they were like, well, obviously this big strong guy was the cornerstone of everything.
He is going to go back, right? He's going to go back to King. He's going to help in the battle, like taking King's Landing. But then he's going to get caught up with Nettles, who I'm so mad we haven't met yet. Right? They're going to be, they're going to do their thing, and then eventually he'll end up fighting. Yeah. And then he'll fight at the Battle of the God's Eye. So I don't know. I guess I feel that same way. Of like, I actually like that, like, and especially when you think of like how their relationship is, that they are uncle and niece, and that he's so much older than her. And Nettles is going to be. I hope that they age her up, but I think that there's like going to be a big age difference between the two of them too. That like that's going to be a pattern for him. And I don't know. This is a guy who I feel like full Succession mode of like, people never change really. This is who Damon is, and I don't know, but I like it, so it's fun.
There doesn't seem to be any information on if, at least not on the wiki, on if they've cast Nettles yet.
I really hope they do. I feel like it's so weird that they have shown us Hugh Hammer and Ulf, and we haven't got Nettles yet. I guess the only difference thing is when I had the idea of the dragon seeds in my mind, was that in my head there's the like looming 3 dragons are missing, and only Nettles claims one of those 3 dragons. Like, she gets Sheepstealer, but Cannibal and Grey Ghost never get claimed. If my memory is right, it's all like the existing named dragons that are going to be claimed by basically Alan, Adam, Hugh, Ulf. So I don't know. I've liked what they've done so far. I feel like we've kind of like forgotten that, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I like that it was seeded, but I'm definitely waiting for more dragon seed stuff to happen.
Yeah.
First thing I saw when I Googled Nettles was I think this was just posted in Vulture.
Vulture, yeah.
There's mounting evidence to suggest the second season of House of the Dragon will leave out a pivotal book character.
No.
There's another theory that's a little strange in there, but
yeah, I just want to see her feeding sheep to Sheepstealer. That's all I want. Yeah. You know? But I could see them waiting until Damon, because like they get sent to Maidenpool together, right? That's how they end up together. I could see it being like, you know, introduce again, similarly to what you were saying, Mari, of like there's certain characters where it doesn't make sense to introduce them at the end, like in the middle or the end of a season, and instead wait. Like, I mean, one thing we haven't really talked about yet in terms of like, if we lose Jace, Craig and Stark will return in this story, I presume, but I feel like that was a really big missed opportunity in terms of things like that have happened already that I didn't like. Probably should have talked about in the first half, but I guess not, because Kragan's so important moving forward, and we would have like teased that a little bit. But I'm really upset we didn't get like more insight there. I'm hoping it happens when Kragan comes, but like introducing Kragan now to basically do nothing with him, and then like that was an interesting choice that maybe in retrospect doesn't make a ton of sense. But
I mean, I think Kragan is the most interesting part of the whole story, personally.
Kind of agree.
Which is because it's such an interesting way for the story to end, to have like basically a third party, but a third party that you have like a psychic connection to because of Game of Thrones, right? Like you feel connected to the Stark, so that you don't have to do a lot of setup, but like for that third party to like be the driving force of the end game, essentially, which I assume is the end game for this show, you know, I think is really interesting. And so I'm very curious to see ultimately how they set it up and when they set it up. And obviously we saw Kragan here at the start of the season very briefly. I would bet that most people don't even remember that they were like, oh yeah, I think we saw the wall, that was fun, but I don't think they remember who Kragan is if they haven't read the book. So yeah, I'm definitely curious to see what we do with that.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how that ends. Like, to me, that is what I'm really I'm not looking forward to it because I don't want it to end. But where do you stop in a history book that keeps going for like another like 60 years or something?
I feel like Night of the Wolf, was that what it was?
Yeah.
I feel like that, to me, that makes the most sense, is the ending of just like sort of clearing house and like ultimately
Hour of the Wolf, but
Hour of the Wolf. Thank you.
Hour of the Wolf. Yes.
Because it's sort of like the end to most characters that we've known in the show at that, but like anybody left has some kind of ending to their story at that point, I think.
Right. And
I saw some theory that
no hooded hand then.
Yeah, I saw some theory that like, do you do a reverse? If season 1 was a prologue, do you do basically an epilogue, and you basically like sort of fast forward through some of the things that happen, kind of like once more of the exciting stuff is over. I don't really know where you start that, but like Aegon the Younger's reign is like real sad for like an ending to the show, which is why I think you have to go all the way to like Hour of the Wolf and set up something. And I also wonder how much this show, you know, like alludes to, like, this show does start with literally like a Daenerys Targaryen name mentioned, right? I think, right? Like, does this show end in a way like, what's the thing that most
the text,
the title card? Yeah. So I was thinking, like,
I think you do like a 6 Feet Under.
Yeah. What's the thing that you can most like set up people to basically go watch Game of Thrones? Is basically like kind of what I think they.
I think whether it's a full episode or just like an ending montage, I think it would totally be cool to see like a few steps forward in history after a big event happening. They don't have to go like full like cheesy like Joffrey was known as like but like something to because we have that history, like something to show how things played out in the near future, I think makes some sense.
What if they do the classic, like in every 80s movie where it's like, and here's where they are now, but it's just like they died.
The freeze frame,
they died. They died. They died.
Well,
listen, that's true of everyone.
It's Game of Thrones. It's like
Rhaenys fell underneath the weight of melees, and then it freeze frames.
So where do we think some of the big things are going to lie? Because there's 8 episodes, right? So this season, so if we still have to fit in the sewing and the Battle of the Gullet and the taking of King's Landing, where do we think
we have the 4 episodes right there?
Yes.
Basically.
So maybe this next episode is kind of like a breather, oh, this is what just happened. We just saw them dragons dance, like whoop de whoop. Let's get our stuff in order. And then do we get episode 6 is the sewing, episode 7 is the Battle of the Gullet, episode 8 is the taking of King's Landing?
That kind of makes sense.
I think whether or not you need like the sewing of the I think, like, I know it doesn't sound like a breather when I say that a bunch of people are going to get burned by dragons trying to conquer dragons, but I think it kind of like it'll be people we don't know.
Like it's like like events don't really. It's more about like narrative. Like, how are you feeling? What's the direction of things? And that doesn't really. That feels more like losing losing your biggest dragon, I think would make complete sense that we start next week being like, how do we get more dragons? And we just set that up from like Rhaenys' last words almost to Corlys was like, raise him up. So I think it makes sense to sort of like do this in response to her death as a way to honor what she wanted and to like replenish.
If you were to go back to the Game of Thrones model and say where episode 9 was often the one with the thing, and obviously I know like you could do that with Battle of the Gullet, and then Fall of King's Landing is episode 8, like 7 and 8. You could also, I think, like if you're looking for like filler in terms of like, I think I do think the last moment will be Rhaenyra on the throne. So I could see them putting filler anyway, but I could also see this like, what if actually the end of episode 7 is the taking of the, just because I think this is like kind of like the Game of Thrones way, and that doesn't mean House of the Dragon will do it. And then you have sort of like because like what that last episode normally was like, and here's all the way we're gonna like cliffhanger you into like where people are sort of headed and going next episode. I mean, there is a chance that I don't think it's likely. I really don't think so. I think the last episode will be taking King's Landing, and maybe that filler is after the battle of the yeah, I don't know. That's
so
you got to put something somewhere basically here. What
I'm thinking is, first off, I think House of the Dragon has a different format than Game of Thrones. To me, I feel like I think episode 4 is the big one. Like because if I remember correctly,
halfway through, essentially.
Yeah, halfway through. Episode 4 last year. Oh, I just said it was something big that happened.
It's King of the Narrow Sea last. Although, yes. but last episode was a 10-episode season.
Yeah, so
then 5 was We Light the Way, which is
was the wedding, right?
Yep.
Right before the time skip, right? Like or the
it was the last one before the time skip.
So I think we're getting and then for me, I think we get like those last episodes were bang, bang, bang. Plus, remember, we're going back and forth between a Team Black and a Team Green. So my thought process is we've already seen the setup for next episode. And to me, I think the setup of next episode, it's mostly gonna be Team Green dealing with the fallout of their victory, dealing with Aegon. What's going on with Aegon.
True. We do have to recover the
Aegon aim and stuff.
And we should talk about how this week's cliffhanger is very annoying as a podcaster who's read the book.
Oh, who knows the book? Yeah.
We discussed it before the podcast, Grace and I was like, because honestly, from my perspective, as a like trying to be in the headspace of a show viewer, only like I think I would have interpreted that as he's dead. They showed his body and did a zoom out. He's dead.
Yeah.
And if you say anything other than he's dead, he's not.
You know he's alive.
I had to tell Chappelle.
Us who know the truth. Yeah, if we're like vague about something that you thought was a guarantee, you know what the truth is. So,
but I do think the scenes from the next episode were kind of like
yes. If you watch the next time on, then they kind of in their vagueness do exactly what we just talked about and let you know that he's not dead.
That he's not dead. Yeah. So and I've seen reviewers who are purely show only who picked up on that.
I personally recommend to never watch the next time's on.
I love watching the next time's on.
I think if you're a book reader, you already know what's coming next. But
that's true.
But if you're a show only, I think. I mean, listen, everyone watches their own way, but I think it often kind of can undermine because it's like I think the writer is often not in charge of what gets shown on the next time on. So their intent for ending the episode the way that they do is sometimes undermined by whoever puts together that.
It did look like he was dead. So
our friend Fitzy, Push a Recap, so he talked about how squeamish he's going to be based on Viserys's makeup from season 1. Cannot wait to see what Aegon looks like. I cannot wait.
So I think next week is going to be. I think that's what's going to be our filler is like Team Green dealing with that, and then we do see Rhaenyra. She was talking to not Celtigar, but one of the one guy who's really loud in her council about how they.
Do you know that guy's a full-on transphobe on Twitter? That guy, I cannot believe they put him.
Really?
Yeah, he is full on like his. It sucks so much that they cast him and then put him in scenes with Emma Darcy. I just need to say this, and if Emma Darcy doesn't care, whatever. But I hate it anyway.
Wait, so he's the worst on the show, and
yes, that's what I was just about to say. Oh, so he follows his character. So I think we're gonna get the fallout for Team Green. Rhaenyra is telling that crotchety old dude that they need the Riverlands. So hopefully we will get the resolution of Harrenhal, because we also get Daemon talking to, I think that was the Brackens, saying that y'all are gonna burn. And we know that Stonehenge gets taken over, but of course it gets taken over after burning Mill, but they didn't do that. So my thought process is Green's aftermath, Harrenhal resolution, they get their host. Now we're about to go to war. The sewing starts on episode 6, directly followed by but followed by Battle of the Gullet. But also don't forget that even if we don't get the Battle of the Honeywine, which you can take it out of here, you can still do the whole Aemond not harassing the Riverlands, not that part because that's later, but like Aemond doing the pincer maneuver where Aemond comes out from Aemond and Kristen Cole come out from King's Landing. Jason Lannister comes from the Westerlands to kind of get the Riverland. Like you have to do that in order to get the taking of King's Landing, because you got to draw them out to get the taking of King's Landing. So that's where you start, like episode 8, and that's how you get that filler for the end of King's Landing. And that part is actually really good because it shows how the lack of hubris from Aemond, because he gets so cocky that he gets moved out of he moves himself from King's Landing. So I just mapped this whole thing out. Look at me. Sorry.
No, I think it's great. I think the other, like the way last season ended too was like, I feel like 9 and 10 were like the same, like each side's thing. It was both the fallout of Viserys dying, and it made sense to stick with Green because it's like they find out first, and then sort of 10 is like the black. It was the Green Council, and then it's like the Black Council, right? So that would make sense to me, Mari, that in this season you would do something similar where you could have these back-to-back episodes where like we really stick with one side and then go to this. Even though like beginning of the season I feel like was like really Green heavy, but I think literally their king being like burned up and figuring out what to do as well. Like I think we've had a lot of scenes this season of like small council decisions and like strategy. And I feel like having your king be like, how are they going to fix that? I also wonder, Otto ends up in King's Landing and gets beheaded when they take it. And I wonder if Aegon like being burnt alive means Otto is, I guess you can't because Darren, he implicitly name dropped Darren, and so you would think that you would see them together if he gets like news and he's like, I have to go back, and then in the last episode he's like there, and it's really that's pretty funny.
Show up together.
That would be funny if Aegon screws him over yet again.
Oh boy.
Anyway, fun to talk about. I think.
I honestly, the only thing I wanted to mention was like we talked a little bit about Maelor. Sorry, Maelor the Missing, which George R. Martin wrote on his blog, and there's been some like there's been an attempt to try to, I think, like interpret like what is he thinking and feeling about season 2, and it seems like he's maybe implying that there are some changes he does not like, but there are also some changes he does like, and particularly like Aegon, in the same way that he really liked Viserys' portrayal. So it's interesting to me that like if this is potentially the start of a split between him and the showrunners in terms of their idea of the direction of the show, what that could mean for the future of the show. But it's a lot of speculation right now, I think. So hard to really comment on it too much, but I think it was worth pointing out. Perhaps.
I can't remember if we talked about it on the book club on PSR or not, Taran, but I'm not too mad that Maelor is gone, because honestly, his biggest impact is in Blood and Cheese. Yeah. And him not being there for Blood and Cheese means he should not be there for the rest of the show, because he just ends up dying.
I don't mind it either. I haven't found any of the changes to be significant enough yet that I've like, when I was watching Game of Thrones and like Lady Stoneheart wasn't there, I was like, excuse me? That seems significant. But so far for me, I feel like we haven't breached quite that dramatically, in my opinion, at least.
I don't. Maelor's like, what happens to Maelor? Like, I think that's the thing that like he gets like chopped apart by a mob, and I feel the same way about Blood and Cheese. That if anybody's being like, we need to see the scene, I'm like, no, you don't.
We need to see him traumatized and then chopped to pieces. We are missing crucial bits from this story.
I'm like, again, like the things that the children are most impactful for, other than the ones who die, it's how it affects then their parents or siblings or whatever. And this one is like, I think there's enough. It's like, I don't think you need the extra like and like maybe and I think you could recreate this in some other way, which is basically like the small folk are so mad that there's a civil war that does not involve them, that they have been like traumatized by, that they take their anger out in some way. It could literally just be like Rickard Thorne, who's the one who's like in charge. A bit like, you don't need it to be a small child. So I think it's fine that Maelor does not exist in the world of House of the Dragon.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
no,
any other final thoughts here as we wrap up?
Yes, but it's trying to come back to. Oh, Helena. How do we feel about Helena's portrayal here? It seems like a lot of shock, but it's weird. Also, in a sense of like, I loved how I loved her portrayal during the procession, and like how you can debate if like, is this autism coded for her character. Like I didn't mind how she froze up during Blood and Cheese. Didn't mind the aftermath of everything with her and Allison. Loved the procession. But now after this, the rationalizing the child's death, the forgiving Alicent, like I don't know. It's almost like I don't know. Like I didn't criticize her not like yelling and screaming during the Blood and Cheese thing, because like I don't think I would have yelled and screamed either. I think it would have been the shock now. But like her not being as like sad and stuff like that is kind of weird to me. It is almost like they made her, I don't want to say normal, but it feels like I felt like I loved her like mumbling the prophecies and stuff and all that beforehand, and her being really into things like beforehand. And now she just kind of like, it's just like not doing any of that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like how did something really traumatic happen to you and it makes you quote unquote normal? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't like it.
No, I feel like, I mean, from my perspective at least, we're just kind of seeing more of her. Like I never thought that she was just like always mumbling prophecy like at all times. Like,
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that like she's going through grief in a very like specific way.
Yeah.
That like, yeah, I haven't minded it personally. I think that like, I don't exactly know where they're going with it, but I don't really mind because she is just so different from the rest of her family. And I think that's interesting. I'm not sure where that comes from, like why she's so different. Like they were all
Because the
raised in the same.
dreams.
It may, yeah, maybe
Her being
it's
a
the dream.
dreamer.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess I've kind of liked Helena personally on the show.
Yes,
But,
I like her.
But I don't know. I don't know where it's going. So
yeah,
I think this is one that's a little bit. There's a world where I think the show wants to be really mindful and careful of like depicting her in a way that's like sort of like, to quote it, like hysteria, while also like, yeah, her child did get like killed in a pretty dramatic way. So I don't know. I thought the like reaction to being like, should I be able to grieve when like small folks, children die literally all the time and more? I think like the idea, this is what I like think is interesting about shows that depict royals, is like they are not the same. They are not under the same circumstances. And so what their reactions, like Otto's reaction to his grandson being killed, is like, how do we depict it in a way that is most beneficial for us while we're in a civil war? Like, I think that kind of stuff for me is so interesting. I am interested in, I think this is probably next episode where we get sort of Helena back and how her relationship with Aegon looks now that he is going to be like suffering. The book says like she never visits him. That does not mean she doesn't. Like, I am interested in like getting back into like her and her motivation. There's also, I think, going to be, there's implications about how she's unreliable as a dragon rider, which I think will be interesting, knowing that like their side has just lost a dragon, and they were already like, like the other side lost a dragon too, but like, okay, but one of our dragons needs to be ridden by you, and I need you to do, like, potentially need you to do that. And her being like, absolutely not. Like my husband is, like burned to death with his armor, like stuck to his skin, and like my child is dead. Like I'm not gonna ride the so like I think that there's more we'll get in terms of like them wanting her, like potentially more like, okay, we like I know you were grieving, but now I like need you, and her being like, I'm still grieving, like and more now. So I don't know. I don't mind the depiction of Helena. I think that there's a world where like I could argue probably like would be more intense than it is, but I find it very interesting the way that they've chosen to depict the show. I think this is a thing too where like sometimes I feel like it necessary to have a reaction and an opinion on what has been happening so far, and this is one where I think like I might need to see her arc in totality to because
that's kind of how I feel.
it ends with a suicide, and I think that is also a tricky thing to navigate.
Okay, yeah, I see her.
So yeah,
because like in the book she goes mad. Like they say she locked herself in a room, she doesn't eat, she doesn't take care of herself, she refuses her kids, like, and to me that seems real. As a mother to myself, that seems absolutely real and on the nose, you know what I'm saying? But I also do recognize that grief transpires in different ways for different people. So now that you say that, Grace, I think you're right. I think we will have to see the totality because we do know that it does end in suicide. So I don't know if the writers want to have that hystericalness, like you said, to lead into the suicide. Because I mean, if you think of when Tommen's in, like, that was brutal because we didn't see it coming. He was, he was just like, yep, just let's go. And you're like, damn, so it's just very interesting. Her character, I really love that actress. And I love that we're getting more of the character. I love that they made her a dreamer. And I guess that's what I'm also missing too. Like I kind of wish she was, again, me and prophecies. I love prophecies. I kind of wish she was still like trying to warn them and everybody I love the Cassandra like storyline. So I wish she was still trying to warn them and they still weren't listening type thing.
Yeah. All right. Grace, anything else?
No, we covered a lot. I think
we did.
It was very fun. We'll have to
we basically tried to do the entire series from this point to the finale.
Yeah, I feel like this is the first time
you haven't let it out.
This is the first time we've been able to do it in full. So I imagine like even if we come back at the end of the season and check in again with another book club, like we could go 2 hours. Like don't hold me to this, but like also like this is the first time basically since we were doing book club stuff last season that we've been able to be like, okay, here are all my thoughts. Yeah. So forgive us. I hope you found it entertaining. Yeah. And if you have theories, like send them our way. I would say not on Twitter just because like people will see them. So I don't know how you're going to send them to. I think tastemakers rhap@gmail.com. You could send your theories. You could DM us if our DMs are open, like that sort of way. But if you have spoiler stuff, I would hold back on Twitter just so other people.
I feel so bad because people will ask me like straight up spoiler stuff on the TL, and I'm like, I'm answering you, but I also feel bad for anybody following me as well.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here on the House of the Dragon Book Club. We will be back weekly to continue to recap the episodes in a non-spoilery way. But yeah, we'll probably do something at the end of the season to sort of catch back up and talk through the decisions that they ultimately do make and see how right we were about how we mapped it out. So stay tuned for all of that. And yeah, I think that's what we have for you. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And we will see all of you next time.